Still talking about advantage and advantage. Class 5, okay? And let's take a look at the book. Today, I'm going to talk about avoid generalization. So what is that? I'll explain it here. And my book is really quite good because it's exactly in the order that it truly needs to be. So it explains everything very clearly. And today I'm going to go through the book with you and show everything in detail from page 8 to page 40. And I'll stop around page 39 to show you the avoid generalization section. What is that? Well, what is avoid generalization? Let's go. I'll explain it here. When actually make a statement that applies to everyone or everything. It's making a statement that everyone does that. For example, Germans are punctual. Okay, but where did you get that from? What is the study? What is the article that says Germans are punctual? So there are techniques to avoid this kind of generalization. I'm going to show you some here, mainly using modals, but look at how important this is. Here's an example. People get lonely when they move abroad. How can we make this more interesting? Because not everyone feels lonely just because they move to another country, right? So in order to be careful and to prevent any misunderstandings, we really have to avoid making that particular statement at this time. Some individuals, now I'm already saying that not everyone, just some of them, may experience loneliness. Here, this may is also avoiding generalization. It's one of the techniques used to avoid generalization. And I'm talking about a statement in the sentence that not everyone does what I'm claiming, okay? Not everything either. The examiner expects you to be particularly precise about this, have control over the language. When you're making a statement, especially about something that not everyone, not everything is utilized or done, it's important to consider the context. And here, for instance, you become more rounded as a person. Using you isn't appropriate, it's too vague. Rounded isn't clear. So here, there are some different versions that I will be putting up on the website for you. These PDF files will be available there on the website, so you can check them out whenever you want, and there really won't be any problem at all. And here, in some particular cases, you see, experience can help. I'm not stating it as a fact, I'm saying it can help. So that's very important. Here, everyone, you shouldn't be used. We use many individuals, some people, those who, I really like that. Is and are, absolutely not. Maybe, can be, tends to be, always, never. These shouldn't be used either. They're overused. Occasionally, in some cases, under specific circumstances, good, bad, not at all, beneficial, detrimental, useful, harmful, hard and easy, absolutely not, challenging, manageable. Sports, okay, just that. To avoid generalizations, we have to use some techniques. And in the book I mentioned, there's a clear sequence. Remember, the book is available for sale on Amazon, okay? And in many cases, I use the book. It's very interesting because it goes step by step. It explains everything. Why do I do this? Why do I have to do this? So it's very important to follow the book as well, okay? It's self-taught. It's meant for self-learners. In many cases, individuals may experiment. See, in many cases, usually, I'm not saying it's everyone. Working from home can make this difficult for many people. See, I'm avoiding generalization. Adjusting to a new culture can sometimes really take quite some time. People expect certain people wait. So I'm limiting what kind of people. And here I'm putting under specific circumstances, support maybe. So this maybe isn't actually saying that it's truly so or that it is definitely the case, okay? So I would really like you to pay attention to this avoid generalization, which is what I'm going to talk about here on page 39 of our book. But going back to the book, I'll go through it and I'll tell you right away, talking about advantage and disadvantage, then we'll move on to opinion. Here is the whole introduction of the book, and here I explain why this book is important. And we're going to page 8. Here is the tell, which I've already explained to you, that tell is used in the paragraphs, very important, so you don't lose focus. Here there's a sample of say, then I'll comment on this say. It's very simple. It's really a 6-7 say. Here it talks about the gerund, which I've already explained to you and also explained in the lessons. There's a gerund exercise, a introduction and conclusion, very important because they have to be connected to each other. If in the introduction I mentioned the 2 topics I'm going to talk about, in the paragraphs, in the conclusion section, I also, in the second part of the conclusion, I also have to mention the 2 topics I talked about earlier. In this particular case, the 2 topics that were discussed. So it's important to know that we have to change or switch things up if I'm going to use synonyms for the words to avoid repetition. We also have to avoid repetition. And here it talks about how to prepare an introduction for the phrase state the purpose. And here it includes the thesis, which are the 2 topics you're going to talk about in the paragraphs, okay? And we keep going. So here there are several types of samples, right? There are several different introduction templates, all of which are very interesting and included in the book, okay? This book, which is for sale and really quite cheap, is available on Amazon, okay? And then the conclusions, right? How to write a conclusion, almost. What are the mistakes we can make in the ECEI, right? For example, here, one of the mistakes is to write only the advantage or only the disadvantage, okay? And how should it be? What's the problem? Actually, this lowers your task achievement score, okay? So how better approach, how should we actually do it, right? So here it explains, always at least one advantage and one disadvantage, both in the introduction and in the conclusion. The same ones, of course, but using synonyms, okay? And in each paragraph, one starts with the advantage and then with the disadvantage, okay? Here it also talks about what I mentioned earlier about being too general or vague, a vague sentence. For example, technology is good. No, absolutely not. Why is it good? Why is technology good? And is good a word you can use? Absolutely not. So here is the better approach. Replace good, bad, think, all of those with beneficial, detrimental, and so on. I've already mentioned this and it's in your book, so it's very important. Using informal words, a lot of kids, stuff, things, and contractions as well. You can't do that, so what are we going to use instead? So there's a whole vocabulary here for you to use instead of those words. A lot of like children instead of kids, and many instead of a lot of, several as well, right? And here in the book itself, there's a sequence, a really nice sequence that you can use. In fact, you should use, okay? Because you can't just make things up, since a lot of people write and say, oh, I'll just write this here. No, you can't do that. There are rules for academic writing. There's a structure you have to follow, right? And there are academic phrases here in the book that I really want you to use. Here we have, also look here, mixing past. That's a problem for everyone. Mixing present, past, and future. Well, the say most of the time is done in the present tense. In fact, it's done in the present tense. At most, you might use the present perfect to indicate a past event, obviously without dates, without any dates at all. Because the present perfect is not used with dates, and that's how it's used. You don't mix tenses, no mixing past with present with future. No, you can't do that. And another thing, to improve your coherence and cohesion, you need to use, grammatically speaking, the right grammar. The linking phrases, linking words, transition words, whatever you want to call them. But you can't leave them out. I've already mentioned some of them in the first lessons, but I'll dive into others as well. But pay attention, because everything is in the book. And it's all very well explained. Very important. It's important to know this, okay? For example, here, the book shows how to write a good conclusion and also how to make a bad conclusion. Don't repeat words that are in the introduction. You need to use synonyms or even paraphrase. I haven't talked to you about this yet, but my books will have it. We'll get to that information, okay? Good, bad, important people think. No way, we are not going to use those. And here in the book, it shows you how you should write, how you should substitute words. Here it also has the linking words, the transition words. Moreover, in addition, furthermore, similarly. So show connection, express contrast. However, on the other hand, whereas while these I haven't covered yet, but we will get to our time to talk about all the contrasts which are also in the book. So here, instead of using good, you will use positive, effective, useful, beneficial. Instead of using bad, you will use harmful, negative, detrimental, disadvantaged, and so on. Big, large, significant, considerable. Very cool. And there's also a summary that I call it the Kika's PDF. But the Kika's PDF in here is, if you don't remember many, I'll show you in a moment. If you don't remember many adjectives and so on, there's a bunch of adjectives that I put together. So at first you can do the I6S with those adjectives, and then you'll gradually expand your vocabulary. Look here, the city has a big problem, see? We need to improve significant there. So all those adjectives up there, I'm putting them here in sentences for you to use, to copy. And here are the most commonly used adjectives: significant, considerable, serious, dramatic. These are important adjectives to use. And certainly, we can use them in a lot of situations. Significant can replace important, crucial, vital. If you don't remember significant. If you don't remember large or bottle or considerable, and so on. Here, I'm also talking about some conjunctions here. Everything is included, but separately I provide it. It's called Kika's PDF. I transferred it to the book. Everything is in the book, both and end. So when there is, I'm going to explain, of course, I'll get into the grammar and explain. But when there are two things, for instance, like the word both, such as in the sentence, the government and the private companies should count. So when there are two entities, I use both and. You can earn points by using these grammatical structures. Very important. And here is not only the government, but also the responsible private companies should also. So it's also really good to use these so you don't end up with those run-on sentences. Run-on sentences means, as I say in my own language, those really long sentences where we end up not understanding anything at all. So we use conjunctions, contrasts, the grammatical structures that we have. This is called complexity. Try, it's very important. I'm also going to talk about complex sentences, whether and or. when you have two things, either one or the other, because in Portuguese, we say it like this. Speaking in Portuguese, because I don't only teach people who speak Portuguese, but here's an exception. In Portuguese, we say it like this, or you or I'll use or, sorry, in Portuguese. Either you pass, either you study for the test in order to pass, or you fail. So we use or and or. In English, you typically don't use an all in conversation. We use either first and or after. Either you study for the test or, and the fail, I said pass earlier. No, you fail, okay? So it's very interesting. It's important to use whether and or are also conjunctions and very important to use. I've already explained whether and or, and I'll go into it more when I get to task one. I'll explain a lot about embedded questions, which would be indirect questions, and whether and or will also come up. And here are some, not all, of the transitional phrases. And here, it's really cool because later on, you'll see that each transitional, the word can, in fact, be replaced. Actually, I show in the book that it can be replaced by a construction. For example, you can use thus as so, but I'll get to that. This is one of the most interesting things you can have. It's in the book. This was my idea because sometimes we want to say, I am sure, I don't know, in an academic context, but we shouldn't say it. I am sure is not academic at all. So we use adverbs to make academic language easier. Surely this approach will succeed. I am sure this approach will, so it doesn't sound good. We go and use surely, certainly, and there are several others. And there are many for ordinary situations too. There are common words like we go for a more personal approach, and there are others here as well. Depending on the context, we keep improving, like here, I don't know. Look at this, possibly, uncertainly. And that's how we go on. Check it out. Ordinary, it's clear. Then you go there, use clearly. This is really cool. Maybe. You really feel like using a maybe, don't you? Don't you feel like it? But you can't. Let's use perhaps, possibly, conceivably. And then you could look at that. Or in the end, you feel like it. In the end. No, let's not use it. Then we'll use it. Ultimately, eventually, consequently, and so on. Adverbs are wonderful for replacing ordinary words. And here we go. Look, so can be replaced by therefore, thus, accordingly, in my opinion, arguably, and so on. See the so there? So, action must be taken. We can use therefore, action must be taken immediately. Thus, action must be taken immediately. Accordingly, action must be taken. See how we can substitute in this context? And how interesting and cool it is for us to do this in Lean because it sticks in our heads more easily. It's really, really interesting. Look here, in my opinion, okay, we use in my opinion, right? We use it, but that's more like a 6 or 7, okay? But if you want something that's really an 8, you're going to use it differently. In my opinion, this is the most pressing issue today. Arguably, this is the most pressing issue. So we're going to substitute evidently and so on, okay? So pretty interesting, right? So look here. However, nevertheless, and nonetheless, which are all the same thing, they replace but, okay? And that's how we go on. Here in chapter 5 of the book, I talk about the activities, right? By the way, here are the exercises for everything that was discussed above, okay? There are exercises too, and here it's asking you to do a full and a without, which is very interesting. Here, it talks about vocabulary. because we have to use more academic vocabulary like crucial, significant, paramount, and so on. Remembering that I've already covered the conclusion and the introduction, I'd like to remind you of that. The conclusion and the introduction have to be linked to each other, okay? If you're mentioning the two topics, your main ideas, top, whatever you want to call them, in the introduction, which you'll discuss in the paragraphs, in the conclusion, you have to mention them again, avoiding repetition. You can't repeat, okay? So let's talk here about time management. Here I also teach some tips, right? How to make the most of your time, since you only have 20 minutes for task 1 and 40 minutes for task 2. And it's 250 words for task 2 and 150 for task 1, okay? Here I talk again about the structure, right? Paraphrase the introduction, body paragraph 1, which is the advantage. Here, don't forget, when I write support for the first sentence, that doesn't mean you have to do it exactly that way. Why do I say this? Because when you paraphrase, you can't just write a very simple sentence. You have to explain why. For example, education is beneficial, period. No, you have to explain a little more. And there are techniques to explain. You can use a complex sentence, for example, a contrast, which I will still dive into with you. You can use a comma and a relative pronoun like which, etc., but you have to explain. You can't just say that it's beneficial. That's why I put that support for the first sentence. If you didn't say much in the paraphrase, say a little more below to explain. Give an explanation. Then you will present your thesis, which would be both. Both, it's all completely contained in the book. The two topics of the tell, the first and the second, advantage and disadvantage. And here you're going to use TEL in body paragraph 1, use TEL in body paragraph 2, and in the conclusion, you're going to summarize everything you said, okay? Then you're going to mention your topics again without repeating yourself. And give your opinion. Guys, your opinion is important, okay? Make your opinion clear, because it's the only time in say the advantage that you actually give your opinion, okay? And here there's a very interesting sample of the say, already going back to the avoid generalization. Sorry, repetition is going to be in the opinion part that we'll have. For many people, a new life from scratch can be, see? This new life from scratch is a way, it's an idiom. To start a life from nothing. It's really cool. I put it in bold here. Exactly, because it's an idiom. You can use idioms, but more academic idioms. Can be, see, for many people, avoiding generalization. And the whole ICI is avoiding it. And here I comment on the IC, what's good about the IC and what's wrong with the ICI. So it's really interesting to pay attention here. It's the comment about the ICI above. Really interesting, and what needs to be improved, obviously. Nothing gets better. Absolutely nothing is included here at all without improving your writing. And here as well, suggested improvement. So here it is. What's wrong, what's right, what's vague, what's not. Everything is here in the book. And here I put, according to the IELTS criteria, I gave the grade for that C up there, 6.5. And it's already commented there why it got a 6.5, okay? But here it also talks a little bit about it, just briefly, but it does mention it. Coherence and cohesion got a 7. That's commented there as well, okay? Lexical resource, coherence and cohesion are the linking devices, right? If you're using them well, if you're not using them, that's very important, okay? If you're moving smoothly from one sentence to another, that's important, okay? Using linking words, that's part of coherence and cohesion. Lexical resource would be the vocabulary, right? 6.5, because the vocabulary is kind of informal, right? So you see how you might get a good score in something, for example, in coherence and cohesion, and then drop in lexical resource because the vocabulary is very weak. And grammatical range, that's grammar, scored 6. So the grammar has to be really strong. In fact, grammar is going to provide a foundation for all of this. It's going to support all of this. And here are the 6 already successfully corrected using tell. These adorable little colors here are tell, which is the topic. The explanation, the example, and the link to close the paragraph. Don't forget to use tell in sequence. In this sequence, tell, you'll have more cohesion and you'll focus on what you need to focus on. You won't stray from the topic. And we keep going. Now, this here is very interesting. It's in the book, and the book is for sale, really cheap, on Amazon, which is really cool. And these are academic phrases for you to use to get started right at the beginning, because later on you'll get better. You'll see how we improve with each book.